G'day, Geoff Lewis here from Seriously Series, and welcome to a very special update video. I've been putting off doing this video for quite a while, and I do apologise that we haven't had any videos coming out on Patreon or YouTube for over a month now, but a lot has been happening here, and as always I'm going to take you behind the scenes and explain exactly what's been going on, and I'm going to do this in two different videos. This one is just going to be talking about purely what we've been doing, and then I'll do a separate video talking about what's actually been happening here in the workshop, because I've had Damon here and Mike, a good friend of ours, has also been here doing a heck of a lot of work on the vehicles for a very big trip. And this trip is going to be the key subject of discussion in this update video. So if you want to find out this and more, as always, you know what to do. Click on that subscribe button down below, click on the notification button too, but most importantly, stay tuned. Rightio. So, as always, a lot's been happening here, and yeah, it's been a crazy, couple of months, I should say. And basically, as I've talked about in previous update videos on the channel, we were looking at doing a major production or a major documentary series, and this we have called Dust and Dreams. And I think I've explained the title before. I've actually been documenting this along with Damon on Patreon, with a Patreon exclusive series taking you behind the scenes, explaining how sponsors work, how to develop a concept into a documentary series. So if you want to see that, then join us on Patreon. As little as $1 per video, which is $4 a month. You can gain access to all this and more. So I've been sort of walking people through what's been happening, and basically just to sort of breeze over it, we came up with the concept of Dust and Dreams, and this was going to be a trip where we would travel from Uluru or Ayer Rock right down to the Australian Bight. And as always, sort of my passion, and I believe it's a bit of Damon's passion, and Damon's passion is really for obviously cinematography, but also for nature cinematography, is sort of exploring the history and the characters behind it. And with this part of the world, it's a very desolate part of the world, and it's a part of the world that really wasn't sort of opened up until probably, you could almost argue, the 1930s. And the people that went out there and sort of explored this part of the world in an area where there's virtually no permanent water sources, there's very little food, there's very little, wildlife, you could say. There is wildlife, but it's not as plentiful as in other parts of Australia. Were really, really interesting characters. Some went out there to obviously make a fortune, like Lassiter. Other people like Ernest Giles and Warburton, they went out there to sort of make a name for themselves, which sounds absolutely idiotic when we think about it. And if you know that area, how difficult it can be to travel through, even in this era that we live in now, with relatively modern motor vehicles like the series Land Rover and all the rest. So these people had big dreams, and it was the dust out there that really sort of got under their skin and really motivated them to get out into that part of the world. So that was sort of the rationale behind the title. We've been wanting to do this series now for about 2.5 years, and we had to put it off due to the COVID pandemic that everyone knows about, so I won't talk about it too much. But finally, we were sort of seeing that things here in Australia in the early part of this year were looking pretty good, pretty okay. There weren't that many outbreaks, and everything seemed pretty much okay. So we planned to sort of set off in June of this year, but I recently became a a dad or a father for the first time, so we decided to push that back a couple of months into August, which was actually a really good decision because we ended up getting the Delta strain here in Australia, and that just is still doing a lot of horrible things to some wonderful people out there. So it's a really, really sad situation, but you know, it's the world we live in, and that's very easy to say. It's a very different reality. So anyway, we decided to head off in August. We had the vehicles pretty much as ready as we possibly could be. As you've seen with our servicing your 4x4 episodes, the Series 3 has pretty much gone through a complete and utter overhaul from top to bottom. Brand new engine pretty much, gearbox, transmission overhauled, differentials overhauled. So we were pretty confident that on the whole we shouldn't have as many issues as we've had with previous trips. We were taking the Land Rover Parenti, which had been kitted out very kindly by the fantastic team at Goldfields Off-Road, and that was pretty much ready to go. But they themselves had their own battles, and that was also due to the dreaded COVID. Because there's been lockdowns here, there and everywhere around the world, getting accessories and getting parts to be able to do I guess a build or modify a vehicle or even overhaul a vehicle did prove at points to be somewhat problematic. But you know, credit to them, they found a way of overcoming it. They did everything that they could, and luckily we were very fortunate that we had everything we needed to do the trip, so a big thank you to them. Toyo Tyres obviously joined in as well. They came in and helped us out immensely with providing a spare tyre, but also helping us out in other ways, which they've always done right from the start. They're a fantastic company, and we worked with Grab Me Gear, a nice small business, a dedicated business in Perth, which made some wonderful bits of equipment for us. The seat covers in the Series 3 Land Rover, which I'll talk about in the workshop update video, and also pretty much all the bags, all the canvas products that we required for the trip. And obviously, as always, we work with other organisations like Oz Travel Safety Network and Track Care, and you know, a myriad of other businesses too. You know, great things can't be made by one individual. It takes the effort of many, and I think that's very, very true with something like this. But anyway, I've waffled on a bit there, I do apologise. But anyway, we headed off, and on the whole, we got to Ayers Rock and everything was okay. It wasn't fantastic, but it was okay. I'd had food poisoning. Damon got some weird infection in his eye, which caused it to swell up. We had problems with the Series 3. One of the coils, the new coil that we'd actually put on, which was a brand new Lucas coil, failed. So luckily we had a second one as a spare, which was kind of an old part out of the Series 3. But we had heaps of ignition point problems, and that was very, very frustrating. And then the new motor itself started burning through a heck of a lot of oil. So much so it burnt through about 10 litres of oil by the time we got to Uluru, which is about sort of 1,500 kilometres from Kalgoorlie. So that's something I've got to obviously investigate down the track. Getting to Uluru, and sorry about the ums and ahs, I'm doing this all off the top of my head, or Ayers Rock, and that was a fantastic experience. It was the third time that I'd been there, but Damon had never been there before, and as far as I know, Mike hadn't been there before either. So to be able to see it and obviously experience it over a couple of days was fantastic. And because we were actually filming Uluru or Ayers Rock and the Olgas, we actually had to apply for a filming permit. You can't just go in there and just take photos and film this and that, because there's a lot of sacred sites. So with that came a few bonuses, and we were very kindly escorted around the park and actually given a bit of a personal tour of the actual national park itself, and the obviously Uluru and the Olgas themselves, and that was fantastic. But that's sort of where the trip really took a big twist. Damon obviously was still having eye troubles, and supposedly it was an infection known as trachoma, which can be caused by a number of different things. But anyway, that ended up settling down. But we came up against a real big problem, and that was actually COVID itself. As I mentioned earlier, the Delta strain had started getting into Australia, and this had caused the Northern Territory to really have its first series of lockdowns that it sort of ever had in this pandemic. And that caused for Darwin to be locked down and then Katherine to be locked down. And there's sort of three big, for our international viewers, there's sort of three big towns in the Northern Territory, and that's really Darwin, Katherine and Alice Springs. So with that, and because we'd crossed over from Western Australia into the Northern Territory, we eventually weren't allowed to actually travel back into Western Australia. And we tried everything we possibly could to be able to travel back down the Great Central Road, which is the route that we wanted to take, and then travel straight down the Connie Sue to the Australian Bight. And so anyway, in a twist and turn of events, which I won't go into because it was just an absolute roller coaster, some 8 days later we were able to actually travel down the Great Central Road and complete our trip. And this was something that at the time we just thought wouldn't happen, and we were looking down the barrel of basically not being able to film the series and looking at once again our dreams pretty much being completely shattered. But anyway, we were very fortunate and we were able to get across the border, and we were able to get to Warburton, which is the sort of the key town, or you could say settlement, in that part of the world on the Great Central Road. Filled up with fuel, got a few paddle pops, a few ice creams, and then shot down the Connie Sue. And for me, the Connie Sue was the real highlight of the trip. This was the place where we were able to get away from everyone. It took us, I think, 8 to 10 days to actually do the Connie Sue from Warburton right down to Rowlina, and we only saw one car on the entire over the entire 8 to 10 days. So that was fantastic, and that was sort of the real key pinnacle point of the trip that we sort of built the vehicles up for and got ourselves all psyched up for. And it's just a fantastic part of the world. You're starting off in sort of open spinifex plains, and that fades away, and then you're going through red sand dune systems that slowly turn into more of a brown colour, and then almost by flicking a switch, all of a sudden you're on the Nullarbor Plain, which is just flat as a tack. It's 250,000, I think, square miles, and it's basically the same size as Wales, but basically no one lives out there. So that was just fantastic. And getting down to Rowlina, which is a little abandoned siding town on the, I guess, the Transcontinental Railway here in Australia, was a real sense of achievement. And we knew within a day or so we'd be able to actually get down to the Australian Bight. But we had more issues. That morning we decided to get up, head down to the Bight. We were going to start early. Hopped in the Series 3, turned the key, nothing happened. And I was just, I was very tired. I was very, I guess, frazzled by this point with everything that had been happening. And I was very frustrated at the Series 3. But luckily Mike came in and he saved the day, and he sort of diagnosed the problem. And it was the ignition coil. The second ignition coil had failed. So we put a new one on, turned the key, boom, boom, started up, not a problem for the rest of the day. And we'd got permission to drive from Rowlina to Cocklebiddy because that goes through a sheep station. I think it's Rowlina Station. Lovely people. We just called them up because there's mobile reception at Rowlina, and just asked them if we could have safe passage through it. So that was really nice. And getting to Cocklebiddy, there's just a little service station there, that's it. That was fantastic. So we were able to have a nice meal, a nice cool beverage, and then we headed off down to the Bight. And we ended up going down to Twilight Cove, and this is a magic part of the world. And we were able to drive down onto the sand and just look out at the uninterrupted horizon of the Great Australian Bight. And it'd been such an ordeal to get to this point with everything that had happened. And I haven't even talked about half the stuff that had happened, because I'd be here for 3 hours and probably bore most of you to death. But at least myself, I didn't feel like it was finished. It took me a good 2 or 3 days to sort of realise that we were actually there. And even now, it still hasn't all sunk in that we actually did that trip, and we actually were able to achieve what we wanted to achieve. So that's pretty much the saga of Dust and Dreams. Obviously, we then drove back to Kalgoorlie, and now Damon and myself have the arduous task of going through all the film, all the footage, all the stills, all the photos, and obviously making it into something that we can bring out to you guys and girls. Obviously, hopefully in the coming months, maybe it might be in the next couple of years, but we've just got to see how we can actually juggle everything else. But anyway, that's sort of what we've done, and after that, to be honest, I think, at least myself, I'm pretty stuffed, and we had big plans for the last half of the year, and I'm just sort of reviewing what we can actually do and what I feel that I can actually do, because there's no point burning ourselves out. But anyway, thank you for all your support, for all of you that have watched our videos over the years on YouTube. It does make a massive difference, and for all of you that have subscribed to our channel too, that is making a big difference also. And particularly those of you that have supported us via PayPal and via Patreon. It's making this dream basically happen, and it's making these adventures possible. And believe me, we've got some cracker of adventures coming up, hopefully next year and in the coming years. We are actually looking further afield, and we have actually had interest from other individuals in other parts of the world, and so we'll just see what happens. And as always, watch this space, and I hope to see you in our next video.